Hey, I'm Gareth Jones, and you are watching the Vaughan George YouTube channel.
Hi guys, and welcome to Piano and Keyboard Artist, where we discuss the artists related to pianos, keyboards and synthesizers. And today we're going to talk about a very important person in the development and the longevity of Depeche Mode. It's the importance of Daniel Miller. So if you're wondering why you just heard the theme tune to The Godfather played on a synthesizer, well, there's a very good reason for that. The other day my good friend Simon Forsyth was over and we were talking about Depeche Mode. Surprise, surprise. And I was telling Simon about a series I'm busy working on, which is what I'm calling the Mute Records series. And in that series, I want to cover why I feel that Mute Records is the most important label in the history of electronic music. And of course, then we started talking about Daniel and all kinds of other things. But Simon said a very interesting thing. He said that Daniel Miller is the Godfather. And that's a very, if you'll excuse the metaphor that I'm going to go into now, I thought about that and I thought it's very true. So I decided that if electronic music was the world of gangsters, that would mean Mute Records would be the mafia. Gareth Jones would be Robert De Niro. Alan Wilder would be Al Pacino. Al Wilder, Al Pacino. And which means Daniel Miller would be the Godfather. Okay, now if you'll forgive the cheesy comparison and metaphor, I think that does explain it in a very comical but very... It illustrates well the sort of hierarchy. And if you've watched the old mafia movies, you know, the ones with Pacino, Joe Pesci. Yo, motherfucker, what are you doing, you bastard? Joe Pesci. When you've watched those movies, it's funny to see the different types of characters. You have the De Niro character, you have the Pacino character, and they're all kind of badasses. Yo, wait, you're talking to me? You're talking to me? And they're all such badasses. But I remember a scene, I think it was from the Godfather movie, where everyone's at a big party, you know, you've got all the bosses are together, you know, with all the wise guys, and they're all sitting around the table. And their families are there and everything. And everyone's like, hey, Johnny, hey, Frankie, hey, Jimmy, yo, how you doing? Yeah, good, yo, very good. You know, they're all kind of like trying to outdo each other. And there's a lot of music going and everything. But the moment the Godfather starts talking, because the Godfather's usually just sitting at a table, and then he'll start talking. I just want to say a few words. And everyone shuts up. It's like he doesn't have to raise his voice. He just speaks in a whisper, and the threshold of music and the background noise all drops so that we can hear the Godfather. So what exactly has this all got to do with Daniel Miller? Once again, excusing the cheesy analogy, it just makes me think of Daniel Miller being this really the top dog, the guy that doesn't need to shout, he doesn't need to raise his voice, he doesn't need to threaten, he's just the Godfather. He doesn't need to assert himself. He's got nothing to prove. And coming on to the meat and bones of this video now, if we look at Daniel Miller, I know I've mentioned in a lot of my videos, hell, we talk about Depeche Mode a lot. I've mentioned a lot that Daniel Miller is very important in the formation of Depeche Mode, but not only the formation and the mentoring, but also their longevity, and there are many reasons for that. Now, to further illustrate the point I'm trying to make, I'm going to give you a hypothetical scenario here. So be warned, you will hear the word hypothetically used a lot. So, hypothetically speaking, imagine it's 1981, or 1980, and Daniel Miller does not sign Depeche Mode. Let's say, hypothetically, Depeche Mode gets signed by a major label, one of the big players. How would this affect their career, their sound? Well, I can tell you right now, and it is my strong belief that if Depeche Mode had signed to a major label from the beginning, they'd probably not be around anymore. I doubt they would. They may, or they may not, but hear me out. It's 1980, Depeche Mode gets signed to a major label. The label then put them in a studio, and they release Speak and Spell. Now, of course, if Daniel Miller was not involved, Speak and Spell would sound different, because remember, Daniel Miller did produce that record along with Depeche Mode. But now, it's 1980. Hypothetically, Depeche Mode signed to a major label, go into the studio, make Speak and Spell. Now, let's assume those songs were all the same. They sounded a bit different, but it was fundamentally the same record. Now, I believe that Vince Clarke would still leave the band because the writing was on the wall. Vince Clarke was always going to work alone. Vince Clarke is not a team player. I think he's a very strong character and he has a lot of faith in his own convictions. And he's not a negotiator. It's his way. It's his way or the highway. And it's worked very well for Vince Clarke. So, we're in this hypothetical world now. Signed to a major label, make the record, Speak and Spell. Vince Clarke has now left. The record label would then say, oh God, the songwriter's gone, the band is over. And if we look at the real story, that was more or less the feeling. Vince is going, that's the end of the band. Oh, there's a trump card. Martin Gore steps forward. I can write songs. Now, coming back to our hypothetical scenario, the major record label that are now signed Depeche Mode would be very dubious in the fact that, oh, can you really write songs as well as Vince? Okay, I'll tell you what, kid. You can write the songs, but we need hits. We need another song like Just Can't Get Enough, and we need another song like New Life. And this is a typical thing with record labels. You must remember that record labels, I'm not talking about the record labels sort of in the early days, like the 60s and stuff, sort of in more sort of corporate years, and especially now. Record labels are not music lovers. They are not. They are corporate, hard-nosed banks. The most important thing to any record label executive or record company these days is one thing, and that is return on investment. Now, that is sad, and that is hence the reason we have such dreadful pop music in the mainstream these days. But then again, this could be a generational thing. We're not going to venture down that road. But coming back to our hypothetical scenario here, Vince has left the band. They've made this record. Martin steps forward. I can write some songs. They'd be, okay, you need to... Speak and Spell was reasonably successful. We need to do that again. You know, repeat the formula. Remember the formula? Sell records, corporate. Yeah. So it's at this point that Martin would be forced to kind of write in a style that didn't suit him. Now, remember when we got Speak and Spell and then when we got A Broken Frame, the change in tone of those two albums was huge. You know, the vibe, the atmosphere, they are such completely different records. And of course, Depeche Mode have done that throughout their career. They always fundamentally try to change their approach, but that is another story. Coming back to our hypothetical example, the record company are saying, okay, Martin, you need to write songs like Just Can't Get Enough, New Life. Now, that in itself could be a disaster because Martin has said that he gravitates to minor keys, and, you know, Vince Clarke to me is more the major key kind of guy. And, you know, for better or for worse, there's no wrong way. Vince Clarke has got a more upbeat kind of sound, generally speaking. And Martin is a more Martin Gore type sound. That's all I'm going to say. So imagine this. Martin is now being forced to write songs in this very Vince Clarke-y kind of way. Well, that could be a recipe for disaster right there. However, let's say the record company decided, okay, we will let you write A Broken Frame. And let's say, hypothetically, we got A Broken Frame, similar to what it is now. It is my firm belief that the sales would drop. And to cut a long story short, because I can go on and on about this, but I do believe that if Depeche Mode had signed to a major label, they would probably released 2 albums, 3 at a push, and then they would have been dropped. We would not be looking at the Depeche Mode we have today, which 40 years on are more than just a band. They're an institution. Think of all the bands that started around about the same time as Depeche Mode. You know, Ultravox and many other bands like that. They're still going, but they're kind of riding on nostalgia. No disrespect. But Depeche Mode are just very sort of, they're just a different beast, a different kettle of fish altogether. This comes down hugely and largely to Daniel Miller. Now, if you're going to disagree with what I'm saying, let me state my case as to why I say that. Well, you could say, well, Vaughan, you're wrong, because if Depeche Mode had signed to a major label, they're very talented and they would, cream always rises to the top. Well, if you're thinking like that, you're right, but you're also wrong. Diplomatically speaking, I think if Depeche Mode had not met Daniel Miller, they would be successful. As I say, the chemistry, the look, the talent, everything was there. But talent is not a guarantee for success. I mean, we see this all the time. I mean, what's the formula to success in the music industry? Well, it is one of the most off-the-wall, unfair industries in the world. Life isn't fair, but the music industry, how many times have you, if I can speak for myself here, I on this channel, every week I receive loads and loads of demos from independent artists, asking me to have a listen, give some advice. And when I coach people as well, I'm amazed at the quality that is out there. How often do you see or hear something that is outstanding from a person or an artist or a band that are absolutely unknown? And then when you turn on the TV, there's the latest chart hit from fuck knows who. I don't even follow the charts anymore. And you're listening to this and you're going, I don't get this. It's just a hi-hat and a bass. And it's a robotic voice. And you're just like, I don't get it. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, as you know, life isn't fair. Often, as I do, I hear great music from people that are like unknown. The talent is huge. So coming back to my story, the talent, being talented is not enough. It just allows you to sit at the table. The talent allows you to sit at the table, but it does not guarantee your success. So where am I going with this? Well, the success of Depeche Mode to me is one of those great things where it's like where every member individually comes together and it's great of the sum of its parts. It's this grand synchronicity where everything happened at exactly the right time and all the pieces came together. So it's more than just Alan's production style, Martin's songwriting, Dave's charismatic frontman persona. It's more than that. It is all these things together. But it is very, very importantly Daniel Miller who was steering all this. Now, Daniel Miller, I remember saying in a documentary once, I think it was the documentary about the Songs of Faith and Devotion series, where Daniel said something along the lines of he flew to Spain because they were working on if you know the Songs of Faith and Devotion story, for the first 6 weeks, they were just sitting in a studio and they not getting anywhere. And when Daniel flew there and saw what they had, what was happening after 6 weeks, which was essentially nothing, he just walked out thinking, oh, this is not good. And then Daniel said something along the lines of, well, what do? You can't exactly pull them aside and shout at them. These aren't footballers. These are sensitive artists. So that right there proves to me that Daniel understands what it is to be an artist. He understands what it is to be a manager. And he also understands what it is to be able to get the best from your artists, and that you don't crack the whip and say, come on, boys, you're going to do it now. It's not a football team. They are artists. So they need to be treated as artists need to be treated. And Daniel understood that. So Daniel not only understood how to manage and work with people, he also had, or has still, a tremendously killer instinct for business. The man, in my opinion, is, I suppose we're going to have a Daniel Miller fanboy alert siren of some sort, but the more I was thinking about it, the man is a complete genius in his own right. I mean, he's an artist in his own right. He's a complete modular synth geek, and he's a brilliant, brilliant businessman. Just read up the story of how he sold Mute and then bought it back and did well out of it. So he's a very, very clever man. So a lot of the success of Depeche Mode is directly attributed to Daniel Miller. And there are many, many examples of this, but it is that combination between knowing how to manage people, knowing how to market things. And I've never obviously met Daniel Miller. I'm hoping to. We've just interviewed Gareth Jones now, which is, we're ticking the boxes, working our way up to The Godfather. But from what I've heard about Daniel Miller from friends of mine, like Brian Griffin knows him pretty well. Apparently he's just a very shy guy. Not shy, but he's quite soft-spoken. He's not like a arrogant, like, oh, hey, what you gonna do, kid? Typical sleazy record company executive. He's just really, really cool. The man to me has class. And he has run Mute Records in a way that has made it absolutely iconic. And I think for any artist, for any not even an electronic artist, I think any artist to get onto the Mute label is a very, it's kind of like a stamp of victory. Imagine having if you're an artist in this group, imagine having your work out and it says on the corner it says Mute Records. Wow, I mean that's even cooler than Sony and EMI and all these things. Now, talking about Sony Records, now I'm going to tell you a little story now which is related to this. I don't know how true the story is, so please fact check me on this. I was told this by someone in the industry that I trust, and he had no reason to make the story up. But the story he told me was about the band Top Loader. The band Top Loader were big sort of in the late 90s, early 2000s. And they were an indie band here in the UK, indie bands round about the times where you had the guitar bands, the shoegazers. And apparently they were, they started off and they were popular. They had an underground following and they did what bands did in those days. You learned to play an instrument as opposed to programming everything on a fucking computer. So apparently Top Loader did their time and they got signed to Sony Records. Now, apparently Sony Records turned around to them and said, your next single will be Dancing in the Moonlight. Remember that song? We get it almost every night when the moon is big and bright. I don't like that. I mean, I just don't like that kind of music, but no offense to you if you do, or no offense to the band. But apparently Top Loader were against the idea. But Sony Records said, you will do that song or we're going to drop you. Something like this. And to cut a long story short, apparently, they were forced into it. They released Dancing in the Moonlight. And apparently that's what tanked their career, because I think the hardcore fans were just like, no, we're not having this. So that Top Loader story, whether it's true or not, does really explain what I mean would have happened if Depeche Mode were picked up by a major label. There are so many instances in the history of Depeche Mode where they did things that they got away with that they would have never ever gotten away with a major label. One of the things that jumps to my mind now is the Black Celebration album. Now, as you know, when I did the Black Celebration album review, I interviewed Brian Griffin about the artwork, as you know. And if you remember in that documentary that I did with Brian, we went across the river and we went up one of the skyscrapers there and had a drink. And Brian told me it was the moodiest I'd ever seen Brian. When Brian Griffin started talking about the Black Celebration period, he did become quite edgy. And without going into too much detail, you can watch the video. I'll put a link in the description below. Brian did say that round about the Black Celebration period, things became very, very serious. This is when the whole sort of operation had become, it just felt more corporate. It was like everyone was getting a bit nervous, because this band had come from nothing to being sort of like a teeny bop boy band, which people thought they would never last. And then they released those great albums under, in collaboration with Gareth Jones. And now they're at Black Celebration. And to illustrate how tolerant Daniel Miller is, we just need to look at the day when Martin showed up to the studio with the demos to Black Celebration. Now remember, they had just released the 1984 success Some Great Reward, so they had to up the ante. And Daniel was not convinced when he heard the demos which Martin had written for Black Celebration, because he did say there are no hits here, it's never going to get played on the radio. And apparently Martin got really upset, and I think Martin kind of pissed off and disappeared for a week because he was so upset. But anyway, that's all history, because as we know, they came back in and produced Black Celebration, and Black Celebration is, in my opinion, one of the best Depeche Mode albums ever. I mean, I rated it 10 out of 10 in my album review series. So, there's another example of Daniel Miller being very flexible and tolerant. Had they been signed to a major label, Black Celebration would never ever make the light of day. I mean, if you just listen to the structure of Black Celebration, it's got so many like downbeat, sort of droney kind of songs. It's also got a lot of like, you know, piano-y kind of songs. And yeah, there is nothing commercial about that. But then again, Depeche Mode fans, you know, if you're here watching this, you've obviously got good taste, and we don't give a fuck about the mainstream, do we? It reminds me about I always say my art teacher, Mrs. Byrne. She always used to say to me, Vaughan, if you want to be in with a man in the street, you need to lower your standards. And that is so true if you just look at the mainstream music industry. We'll just leave it right there. Another key example that comes to my mind was when Depeche Mode released the groundbreaking Violator album, which in my opinion is one of the most sonically perfect, I won't even say electronic records, I will just say records. One of the most sonically perfect, not even sonically, it's just one of, Violator is fucking awesome, okay? Can I just say, because there are too many good things I can say about Violator. But when Violator was released, here's another story that apparently is true. Once again, check me up. Someone told me that Gary Newman said when he heard Violator, he almost went into depression and said something like, how will I ever match that? Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't know. But I think there are a lot of artists out there who felt that when they heard Violator. If you're a producer and you're in my community here, you know, we talk about production stuff. I often say when you're producing music, pull up reference tracks and A-B your songs to those, not to copy them, but just to see how they sit, you know, sonically and blah, blah, blah. Pull up Violator. It's a very, very hard benchmark to hit, even though this was released back in 1991. It is an album of sonic perfection. Where am I going with this? Well, imagine this. You're a band and you get to a point where you release an album like Violator. What would most bands do? Most bands would repeat the formula. You'd have Violator, then you'd have another album which sounded, excuse me, Violator-ish, and then, you know, but here's where I'm going with this. Depeche Mode released Violator. 1993, they released Songs of Faith and Devotion, which is completely, it's like night and day. It's like, it is, the difference between Violator and Songs of Faith and Devotion is so dramatic. Now, this is where Daniel Miller gave them the freedom. It's kind of like, once again, if they were signed to a major label, imagine this, and that is if they had got that far in the first place. Because as I said, if Depeche Mode had signed to a major label in the beginning, I don't think they would have got past 2 or 3 records. But let's say they did and they got to make Violator. The record companies at this point would be adamant that they'd say, guys, this is the formula, this is where we go from now on. And you might have 3 or 4, 5 albums after that sound exactly like Violator. And this is where I thought Depeche Mode was so brilliant, is that to get to a point where you make Violator, which is brilliant, I mean, the best they've done so far, and then to just change it around completely and release Songs of Faith and Devotion, which is also a work of genius. But I think what I'm trying to illustrate to you here is the risk that they took. And of course, if we look back at the history, it was the absolute right thing to do. There are many examples of this, but this is where I feel Daniel is so important. If you look at the Mute catalogue, as I say, I'm going to bring out a little mini-series on that. The Mute catalogue has some really interesting, slightly off-the-wall artists. I mean, even like Moby, who's a little bit off the wall. Mind you, that Play album did become like a really sort of commercial album. Every song was used on an advert. But Daniel Miller does have the knack for signing people who are a little bit different. And that is why I think when we go into this Mute series, it'll be very, very interesting. So coming back to Depeche Mode and Daniel Miller, Depeche Mode would not be where they are today without Daniel Miller. They would not even be around anymore. I can almost say I guarantee it. If you look at how he signed them in the beginning with a handshake, the handshake seals a contract. Signed on a handshake. So I get this feeling that there was just always this feeling of, there was always like a family kind of vibe, and it was kind of like the blood is thicker than water thing. There was this trust, and you can read the documentaries and all the history. The band really, really trusted Daniel. They trusted him with their lives and their careers. This is why I feel the sort of Godfather analogy fits really well with Daniel Miller, because if you bring it back to the old mafia movies, no one's going to shout at the Godfather. You know, you'll have Joe Pesci having a go at De Niro. Oh, fuck you! What are you doing, you bastard? You know, it'll be that kind of thing. But Pesci, no matter how cocky he was, he'd never shout at the Godfather. He'd be like, oh, yeah, yes, sir. He'd be humble. So I can't imagine the band ever having a go at Daniel, and I don't think Daniel would ever need to raise his voice or assert himself. So Daniel's another interesting one where he's very well documented. There's a lot about him. There's a lot of interviews on him. But at the same time, he's very private and very mysterious. And I find the man very, very intriguing. And I think what he did, not only for Depeche Mode, but for Mute Records, the whole Daniel Miller Mute story is a story which, as time goes by, becomes more and more fascinating. We look back to the period 40 years ago when, this whole electronic music thing sort of started. Okay, we've come a long ways with technology these days, but in many ways we've gone backwards. But that is another video altogether. I think the bottom line is Daniel Miller was absolutely key to the success and the longevity of Depeche Mode. Just looking back through the history, I think Daniel Miller has been a mentor, a producer, a father figure, a godfather figure. You just get the feeling, I get the feeling, I think with Depeche Mode, when things were going horribly wrong, when Daniel walked into the room, I just get the feeling that there was a feeling that Daniel's here, everything's going to be okay. And I don't know why I feel that, but I think I'm right in saying that. Right, my friends, it's up to you now. Please leave your comments below. Remember, this is a discussion channel. Let me know what you think of Daniel Miller. Do you agree with me, or do you think I'm overrating him? Whatever you feel, leave your comments in the description below. Please, if I've not scared you away and this is your first time to my channel, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and know that I am welcoming you with open arms into this awesome community. Please jump in and join the Facebook group. There is a Vaughan George Facebook group, and this group acts as a sort of forum to this channel. It's a place where we can discuss the videos on this channel and get into them, because it's quite difficult to get into a discussion, in the comments below. Yeah, so do join the Vaughan George Facebook group. It's an awesome community, and you will make yourself really feel at home there with like-minded people. Also coming out soon is my Gareth Jones interview series, a special interview series about Gareth Jones, his life, and his debut album, which is called Electrogenetic, which I have heard. I had the privilege of listening to it via a private link, and it is absolutely stunning. So I can't wait for you guys to hear it.
Hey, I'm Gareth Jones, and I've made a solo record for my sins. It's called Electrogenetic. It's out on September the 18th, and this is Vaughan George's channel.
That record is coming out on the 18th of September, but I will give you all the information here, and look out for that interview series. Now, the interview with Gareth Jones will be released on YouTube, but understand that that version will be a short, condensed version, and the full, long unedited version with all the outtakes and behind the scenes footage is exclusive to my Patreon page. And as from now on, I'm going to be moving a lot of the premium content to my Patreon page. And that is a necessary move for me to sustain this channel. You can join my Patreon page. The link is in the description below for as little as $2 a month to see all the premium content without the advert breaks in between. So I hope you will consider joining me there and help sustain and support the channel. With all that being said, guys, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for your support. Lots of love to you all, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. There is a lot of exciting stuff to come. Thank you for being here. Adios.